It did eventually. She said. I mean, Jenny was telling me, so I don't know
I've heard it as well.
But it's such, but you know, and it's such a shame because I know I think people take time to get out.
And now I welcome Michael, who's going to talk about the Guild and Craig.
Yeah. I mentioned before, the Guild is the oldest publishing organisation in the world, 90 years old next year, and formed in 1925 in Rupert Street as a model theatre guild, but inevitably puppets came into it quite quickly, and in 1932 it became the British Puppet and Model Theatre Guild, which it is today, of which I'm the archivist. The big focus of the Guild very early on, right from the very beginning in 1925, was exhibitions. And they had an exhibition at the Players Theatre in New Compton Street in London in 1930. And in that one, Gordon Craig arrived unannounced. I'll read what we've got here is we've got the scrapbook from the first ever secretary of the Guild. And he writes here about Gordon Craig's arrival at the 1930 exhibition at the Players Theatre, number 6 Compton Street, which was converted into a small theatre. It was a shop which was converted into a small theatre, and they had an exhibition there as well as performances in 1930. So an outstanding event was the sudden unannounced visit of Gordon Craig, who took a keen interest especially in the Lanchester marionette performance, which I'll talk about in a second. Everyone except Mr. Craig took even greater interest when, on leaving the theatre, he slipped down the steps at the end of the passageway, and his involuntary expletives echoed throughout the theatre. Fortunately, no damage was done, and we were able to give him a good send-off after he had cordially consented to become our president. And he remained in that post for 10 years as president. Then he became past president for a number of years on notice, I noticed. In that office, he was unduly troubled, but he would have done much more for the Guild had the opportunity arisen. So he attended that exhibition. He saw a lot of puppetry that was going on display there. There would be model theatre especially, toy theatre, but also marionettes, and they're mentioning their Lanchester marionettes. And I brought some of those along with me tonight to show you a couple that he would have seen. These were the performances from the notes I've got that were actually shown on that night. It also says, during the exhibition at the Royal Hotel in the upper room, a visitor, one of the lecturers for the British Drama League, told me that in the cellars of that league there are cases of Gordon Craig's models, which were shown at an exhibition of his work some years ago, and this was written in 1930. With a tactful approach to the league, it might be possible to arrange a small exhibition of these models together with other examples which we understand the league possesses. With these as the centre, it might be possible to arrange a useful show to the advantage of the Guild. So clearly at the Drama League in London there was a whole collection of Gordon Craig's models at some point. So he had a connection with the Guild quite early on. He came to the exhibition, saw a few shows, and I imagine probably connected with quite a few, like you mentioned, Walter Wilkinson, who was there, and different people who were quite famous puppeteers. Waldo Lanchester was a very well-known puppeteer he became. Waldo Lanchester had the marionette. They started off with a gentleman called Harry Wanslow. Now, Harry Wanslow formed the Guild in 1925. It was his book, Everybody's Theatre, that talked about toy theatre, that inspired lots of people to write to him. And from that they arranged a meeting in Rupert Street in 1925, and from that meeting the Guild was formed. So Harry Wanslow worked with Waldo Lanchester, who was a young chap who turned up for one of the meetings, and they formed the London Marionette Theatre. And from that theatre then they did a bit of a tour, and they went round, and at one point they went to Malvern. And in Malvern they set up their tent, the London Marionette Theatre tent, at the side of a gallery and a clay pottery workshop owned by Muriel Bell, and Waldo never left. And he married Muriel, and he formed the Lanchester Marionette Theatre. And Harry Wanslow came back to London and formed the Studio Marionette Theatre. Waldo's mother, Biddy Lanchester, was a very formidable force. She stayed on and kept the London Marionette Theatre going, and Wanslow went off and did his own, and Waldo Lanchester stayed in Malvern and formed the Lanchester Marionette Theatre, which became very well known. George Bernard Shaw wrote his last play for them, Shakes vs. Shav, and they performed for the Queen. This puppet performed at Buckingham Palace, as did another one there, for the Queen when she was 8 for the King's birthday, and they were very, very regarded in Britain. So this is one of the characters. This is Baldo, based on him, and there was another almost identical one called Belsa, Waldo's sister was Elsa Lanchester, the actress who was married to Charles Laughton, who played the very famous Bride of Frankenstein. So if you've ever seen the Hammer horror big with the big huge hair, that's Waldo Lanchester's sister, Elsa. And this puppet was the one based on him, Waldo, and then he had another one based on his sister. So these are big. They were bigger than some of the marionettes he made early on. This is one of his first big marionettes that he made, the 18-inch ones. But this was one that Gordon Craig would have seen at the exhibition. Another one was one of his first ever marionettes, because again most of them started in toy theatre with paper cutouts, but they came to marionettes quite quickly. There's this little beetle character, and this is one of the first characters he made, a grasshopper and a beetle. The grasshopper I've got. Sorry, yes, in the light there.
Yeah.
There we go. Yes. So this little beetle, this is more the size they started off, and they gradually got bigger as time went on.
So
this
did Waldo actually make that himself?
Yeah, it was one of his first marionettes he ever made, and it was made in about 1926.
Jiminy Cricket?
It's not Jiminy Cricket, no. It's based on a nursery rhyme, a very old nursery rhyme about a grasshopper and a beetle, and they enlarged the story into a little vignette, really, piece they did, where the beetle wants to go to the grasshopper's dance, and it's just a small piece they did along with a selection of other things. So this one was one that I gather was quite taken, and it became one that he kept all the way through, really. Whereas the others were retired, the smaller marionettes, this one stayed with the grasshopper. It became a bit of a logo early on for him. It became a bit of his the image he used, and the clowns kind of took over from that. Another puppet that would have been seen is probably the most important puppet we've got in the Guild's collection, and this was a puppet made by Harry Wanslaw. As I mentioned before, he formed the London Marionette Theatre with Waldo, and Harry Wanslaw started the Guild. This puppet is a character called Soko. I'll move him into here. And the significance of him is he was the first puppet ever made for television. So the Guild was involved very early on with John Logie Baird's experimental transmissions for TV. It allowed him to get a full figure on television, which he couldn't do any other way. He started off with a ventriloquist dummy head, and he asked the Guild to come along through various connections and perform. And it was Waldo and Harry Wanslaw that went along to that. As the BBC got bigger and more, and then moved to Alexandra Palace, this was the first figure ever created for television. Before that, they'd used puppets they got in their shows, and figures that they just were performing naturally at their own theatre. But this one was made. That's where the colouring comes from. So the unusual colouring of the slightly insipid yellow and the grey and the black outlines, that's because it would be picked up on the screen quite easily. So yeah, great tradition of puppets followed. Muffin the Mule, the Muppets, various things, but he was the very first. And he was a bit of a clown character that would come on and featured in various short shows on the TV. And then carried on in Wanslaw's theatre after.
Michael, what was he called? Soko?
Soko, S-O-K-O. Soko. I don't really know where the name comes from. But yeah, so he's probably one of the most important figures we've got. Little known really for television, but he was the start of it all.
Would Waldo have done the voice as well, the character?
In the show there was no voices, no. And on TV there was particularly no voices at all. But in the show there was no voices for him, it was just done to music. In some of the other characters there was some narration, but it was always pre-recorded on records if they did that, or it was mainly to music. There was very few voices, just a few little sound effects. And the Beetle one, that was done live. There was a voice for that one, and that was done live by Harry Wanslaw and various other people that were involved. Jan Bussell, who created the Hogarth puppets, he started at the London Marionette Theatre as well. So, and Jan Bussell and Anne Hogarth went on to create Muffin the Mule, but he started there. And Jan Bussell was a stage manager at BBC, so he got them a lot of good gigs at the BBC. And an awful lot of British Puppets and Modern Theatre Guild puppeteers all performed on the earliest TV shows before Watch With Mother, the very early stages. But it was all around 1930. The Soko was 1930. So at that time when Gordon Craig came to the exhibition, it was a very exciting time. The Guild had been 5 years, and it had grown quite remarkably. Within the next, I think, 6 years, we had nearly 1,000 members, which is really very big. I wish we had that now. But it was growing quite rapidly, and there was a big resurgence in puppet theatre. Whereas there'd been the Victorian troupes, and that had then died out gradually with cinema and moving pictures. They converted their ways. There was some carried on. Delvane's troupe, notably in Blackpool, they carried on to the 50s, but the majority left. There was a very big resurgence around this time with books being written, and Harry Wanslaw was prolifically writing lots of books, and it was starting to come back, and there was troops all over the country, and the Guild was very much a part of getting that tradition going around the country. So he came at a time when it was really bursting with energy, and there was a lot of interest. So I think he would have got motivated from that quite considerably, and made a lot of good contacts.
And was he mainly just a figurehead for the Guild?
He was, as it says there, unduly troubled, I think was the word in the sense he used. I don't think he had much of a dealings with it, and as the president still to this day doesn't really have much day-to-day dealings with the Guild, but it was a very important one for the Guild. As you can say, it was really noted that he'd arrived unexpectedly, and I think they were a bit in awe of him. Then he fell down the stairs, and I think they got to pick him up. But after that bit, he maybe lost a bit of the shine, but I think they were still very pleased with that he got to president, and it was a really big thing for them. After that, it was Cecil Madden, who was in the BBC. Yeah, so he took over as president after that. And then after Cecil, who had a very, very long run, it was John Blundell, who was recently lost. And then after John Blundell, it's our current president, which is Peter Baldwin, who's got the Pollock's toy shop in Covent Garden. Yeah, so we've only had really, I tell a lie, it's Harry Wanslaw after, it was Harry Wanslaw after Gordon Craig, and then after Gordon Craig was Cecil Madden. So we've had 5 presidents altogether. But he was the first.
That he came at all is a miracle, because as most people know, all the legendary people in British theatre had to go to see him.
Yes. Yeah, well, at the one exhibition, we've got the signing book for him, and there's some really, quite high up people who come in the British theatre. John Gielgud's on there, very young John Gielgud, and they're signed in, and they've all gone to the exhibition. So
I had John Gielgud introduce a Craig exhibition once, and the whole speech was about, well, of course, his problem, he wasn't really a theatre person because he didn't accept jobs.
Right.
Yeah. Sums it up.
Sums it up really in a way, yeah. So that's the connection, really. That's really why I'm here tonight.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Interesting.
Waldo Lanchester also had a puppet shop in Stratford upon Avon.
He did, yes.
And my parents bought my first puppet when I was 3 from Waldo's shop.
Okay, fantastic. So he's to blame then.
Yes. 50 odd years later. Well, I'll shut up and let's see the show, shall we?
Yeah, we might just tune in.
Okay.